doesn't exist until it cracks apart. Time doesn't exist until it cracks apart. Time doesn't exist until it cracks apart. You were pretty at night. Time doesn't exist until it cracks apart. You were pretty at night. Slew the white-haired one first. You were pretty at night. Slew the white-haired one first.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of It's Time to Rewind, the podcast trapped in its own time loop right along with the movies we discuss. This season is the Serial Bombio, and we're looking at Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel, and we've moved on to Angel Season 5, Episode 19, Time Bomb. Today we're discussing the first loop in the episode, starting at the beginning of the episode and ending at 18 minutes and 3 seconds, with Illyria knocking over a glass of water. Joining me today is the host of Slayerfest 98, Ian Carlos Crawford. How are you doing today?
Hello, I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. It's interesting, and for any listeners listening to this right away, it is a little bit late because this was a re-record completely on me. It just the recorder I used decided not to record my guest for whatever reason.
Listen, I wasn't going to blow up your spot. I was like, we can pretend this is the first time.
No, that's quite all right. I don't mind, taking a peek behind the curtain. And, this episode in general, there is a lot of baggage. And I've been having, I almost feel like this episode is cursed. Because it's been difficult to find guests in the first place because it is the end of the 5th season, so you can't get somebody that's like fresh to Angel,
right?
Because there's so much that needs to be known about it, and if you get somebody new, it's almost like they have to watch practically the entire 5th season to really know what's going on and who all these characters are.
Oh yeah. This out of context, I don't think quite works if you haven't. Because even if you just know what the show is, but you jump into this episode, it would be a little might be off-putting to a new or not so seasoned viewer.
Yeah, I do have a couple guests lined up that are new to Angel, or at least fairly new to Buffy and Angel. But I think the puppet episode is a pretty good one.
Yeah,
I think that's pretty well standalone. And then I have my other guest doing the pilot.
Oh, okay.
So it'll be interesting to go back and see where everything started and get a fresh take on the pilot episode to see what somebody else thinks about it that hasn't seen all of Buffy and Angel.
Yeah. We've been going through season 1. We just finished it for my podcast, and 2 of my co-hosts had never fully seen it before, and it was interesting hearing their they didn't love season 1 that much, but I was like, I promise the show gets better.
Yeah, I've been on Twitter for the past, I think, 2 or 3 weeks. I've been trying to do a championship style voting to see which is the best season of Buffy and Angel. And I was a little surprised because they have, odd numbers of seasons. I paired Buffy season 7 with Angel season 1. And Angel won that matchup.
People do really hate Buffy season 7. I don't hate it. It's not my favorite, but I don't hate it. It's a very polarizing season, which I learned doing it for the podcast.
Yeah, which reminds me, I know that you host, Slayerfest 98, which has been going for a while now, since you're already through Buffy and into Angel. But what is your general background with Buffy and Angel and the entire Whedonverse?
So my the way I get into Buffy actually was my mom really liked it. And I remember I was kind of like that nerd that was like, that show, I thought it was just a romance show. And nothing wrong with liking a romance show, just that's not my bag. I was a little snappy about that stuff. And my mom was watching the Buffy season 2 finale in the kitchen on this the small box TV we had in the kitchen back then. And I remember walking in as my mom's crying because Buffy's stabbing Angel. And I was like, oh, wait, this show seems good. Like, I was like enthralled watching that scene and completely out of context. So I had like I knew that there was, Sarah Michelle Gellar was a vampire slayer and like had seen her in Scream and I Know What You Did Last Summer. I loved her in those. But like just watching that one scene, I was like, okay, wait, I want to watch this. And then I started with season 3. And Angel, I didn't fully watch. I wasn't like as into Angel, and I think it's probably because I came into Buffy at the end of their relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So I would watch it here and there for Cordelia, but especially in that first season, like they focus so much on Angel and they don't use the like ensemble as well. So I didn't fully start like being invested in Angel weirdly until the end of season 3 and season 4, which I don't love that much, is the season I probably know best because that was when I was like, ooh, this is the final season of Buffy. Angel will be my only connection to this universe. Now I have to tape every episode on VHS. And that's when I started like taping every episode of Angel, which I was already doing with Buffy. So yeah, that's the season I remember the most. And I didn't fully watch it till like the DVDs came out. That's when I was able to like catch every episode. Yeah. And like now, even like doing it for the podcast, there'll be like I do separate images for each episode of the podcast. And I like definitely with Buffy, I would try to do them in advance, but I knew the episodes by heart. I didn't need to do a rewatch. With Angel, like definitely there were some episodes when I'd be like, I see that title, but I don't know what happens. I need to do like a speed rewatch. So I could like do the image in advance. But yeah, I don't know. I think I always tell everyone I think Angel's worth it if you love Buffy, even just for the fact that it expands that universe really well.
Yeah, it is a very different show. I know a lot of people like to, whenever they compare Buffy and Angel,
Right.
I feel like the common phrase is that Angel is the more mature show.
Yeah.
But I think in a way it's also a bit closer to a procedural than Buffy. It's like a paranormal procedural.
Especially at the start. I always feel like it feels like Law and Order with like monsters. And I hate a procedural. Like if we're being honest, that's why season 1 is so hard for me. And that's why I do like it moving forward. Cause like, I don't like shows like Law and Order are so boring to me just cause again, nothing wrong with it. But for me, I can't, if there's not like a overarching story or stuff carrying over, I just find myself being like, I don't care.
That's funny. I think that's probably why I probably like season 1 more than most, because I do tend to like procedurals, like not specifically Law and Order. Like my go-tos are like Matlock and Murder She Wrote, and
oh my god, I love that those are your go-tos.
And I think we went through the entirety of Bones. Speaking of David Boreanaz, which that was a long watch. It wasn't a rewatch because we didn't watch it whenever it was live, but we did.
It's a lot of seasons.
See
right?
it on streaming. Yeah, it's like 11 seasons.
Oof.
It's crazy to think that he's played very few characters, because he went from like 6 or 7 seasons. I guess 60. Well, I guess if you count season 1, like 6.5 seasons playing Angel to 11 seasons playing Bones.
Yeah.
And then I think he went to another series that went for several seasons after that.
The Navy SEAL show is still on, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, it's wild. Did you ever watch BoJack Horseman?
No, I never did catch that.
So,
it sounds like it's up my alley, but I never did get around to it.
They have like a running David Boreanaz joke. And like at one point, BoJack like crashes at his house while he's away, and there's like all these posters of the different shows he's done, and they keep making jokes about how he actually is like one of the longest working TV actors, like consistently working. Because like you don't think of, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, we do because we like Buffy and Angel, but like I feel like a lot of people, he wouldn't be who people assume like, oh, who's like a really long working famous TV actor, you know what I mean? But he has like
because he only did like 3 or 4 shows, and if you're
Right.
not familiar with those shows, you're not familiar with him. And they were popular enough to be long running, but they're not like super. They were never like number 1.
Right. They're not like Stranger Things or something. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think it's a good time to actually get into this episode here. And did you get a chance? I know that you were talking about doing your homework a little bit because this is kind of in the weeds of season 5, and I suggest, like, you were going to watch the episode before and the one right after, and I suggested, I took a look at them, and it's like, well, actually the ones before and after don't really apply to this one. It's you have to like jump one more extra episode before and one extra episode after, because I think 2 episodes before it sets up the torture dimension that kicks off this episode, and then 2 episodes later really gets into the plans for the finale, which this has just a little bit of hints of the finale stuff in it.
Yeah. I did watch what's the name of the what's the name of the episode 2? Whatever the episode is 2 before this one, I did watch it.
Underneath,
right? Yeah.
yeah.
I did watch that, and immediately I was like, oh, yep, this is giving me way better context. And it is wild because, like, you're right. That story kind of, you don't really need whatever the Connor episode is between them, because it does feel like this episode could be like a continuation of Underneath, even though they're like 2 episodes apart.
Yeah. And the episode right after this is really just like it's almost like Smile Time. It's another just completely separate comedy episode before they get into the finale that has to do with the whole immortal thing, and it's really just Angel and Spike being ridiculous, like, being in a slapstick comedy in Italy.
That episode I remember because, oh boy, I remember being so pissed when that aired because they like kept in the commercials, it'd be like, Buffy's coming back, and then it's like clearly like just a blonde woman from afar.
Yeah, and then they retconned it in one of the comics, that was actually, that wasn't even Buffy. That was a Buffy lookalike decoy.
Yeah, I forgot about the comics. They did do that. They did like a couple of them, right?
Yeah, I've got the entirety of season 8, and I just went like, I think 3 issues into season 9, and then I've got about a dozen of they didn't call it Angel season 6, but it's the After the Fall, which is basically season 6 of Angel.
Yeah, the weird thing about After the Fall is it like kind of is canon, but not really, because they never really reference it in the like Buffy Dark Horse comics.
Yeah, because in After the Fall, like that came out before season 8, and then they made a huge deal whenever season 8 that like this has the Whedon seal of approval. This is canon. This is not exactly what they would do if they had gotten a season 8, but this is what they would have done if they had unlimited budget.
Yeah, which kind of was like the theme. Yeah, I feel like that's been the running theme for these the Buffy comics. It's like, what if we had infinite money? Great, we'll do superpowers. Great, we'll do giant monsters.
Yeah. So, anyways, this episode kicks off with Illyria busting into the torture dimension and freeing Gunn, and yeah, that's, like I said, this has a lot of baggage, and if you hadn't watched Underneath, you would have no idea what's going on here.
Yeah. I do like it though. I like, so watching Underneath and then this one, I mean, my timeline of Angel season 5, even though it is one of my favorites, is always so weird because Illyria really comes in abruptly. And I forgot that, like, she does spend time going back and forth with, like, is she a villain? Is she not? Even though she's only in like 6 episodes.
Yeah. It's so crazy to think of how,
right?
like, how big of an impact that character has, even though she was only in the last 6 or so, like 5 or 6 episodes.
You know what's interesting about that is I just randomly just started to, in the background, do a Batman the Animated Series rewatch. It's on HBO Max. And that's something I hadn't really revisited since I was a kid. And I was like, there was stuff I didn't remember, so I looked it up on IMDb, and it's weird because it's like 4 seasons and like 80 episodes, but like Joker is only in 15 episodes, Catwoman is only in 8, Mr. Freeze is in like 6. And it's because there are so many other characters, but it like in my mind as a kid, all those characters were in like every other episode
Yeah,
because they had such an
I always
impact.
think of like Clayface, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if I think he only has like 2 episodes where he's the main focus, and then I wouldn't be surprised if he's only in like 2 other episodes.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I feel like that's kind of like the deal with Illyria because it's like, we think like I think of her as a main character. Like one of my co-hosts, Zach, who hasn't fully watched Angel, he knows who Illyria is because he knows that's his husband's like one of his husband's favorite Angel characters. And like it's funny hearing like he was like, well, when does she come in? And I'm like, not till the end. And he's like, but when at the end? I'm like, at the end. Like but like it makes sense that like it's not wild to think that a Buffy or Angel fan would really love Illyria because she is a great character.
Yeah, and it really feels like they were kind of setting her up to potentially be the big bad for
Mm-hmm.
the end of this series, and then they potentially had to shift gears whenever they found out that it was ending, and then they changed track in order to make it into what it became.
Yeah, yeah. I was actually one of my other co-hosts, Philip Ellis, told me he's like halfway through marathoning season 5. And we were talking about it, and because he was talking about the end, and I was like, I am a little forgiving of the end because I know that it got canceled. You know what I mean? I know they didn't.
Mm.
What can you do other than rush your story? Or if you've already filmed it, then it's like, oops, I can't do anything. Um, so I'm a little bit more forgiving because they at least got to, while it is very abrupt, there's at least like a full story being told, even if it feels shoehorned at the end. There is like a thought out story.
Yeah, I do love the fact that they were able to give this a series finale
Yeah.
and not just a season finale that got canceled afterwards.
Yes. Yes. Because that always drives me nuts if like I love a show and then it's like it finishes a season and then it's canceled and it's like, no, but I wanted to see like the complete story or my characters get their ending.
Yeah, especially the ones that end with the cliffhanger because they were so confident that they were going to get another season, and then they got the rug pulled out from under them.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm not sure if I talked about this before, but did you watch Veronica Mars?
Yes, you didn't talk about it before, but yeah, I have seen. I don't think I've seen every episode because it's one of those where my wife has binged a couple times,
Mm.
and like
You've
she
like
didn't wait
hopped
to
in.
watch with me, so I've definitely seen most of the episodes
Mm.
because she has gone through it 2 or 3 times, and so I've probably missed a handful of episodes, but I've caught a large majority of them, but over her like 3 rewatches.
Well, you tell your wife you had a guest on who also loves Veronica Mars. But it's funny because season 3, which is the last season until they did the revival a few years ago,
Mhm.
it has one of my favorite episodes, but oh boy, they kept thinking they were getting canceled. So it's like there are like 3 or 4 episodes in that season that feel like maybe they were supposed to be the like in case finale. Because like seasons 1 and 2, there's always like a overarching mystery that like Veronica is trying to solve. But in season 3, it's like
Yeah,
the first 4 episodes are a mystery, the next 5 are a mystery, the next 3 are a mystery. But again, I'm like always a little bit more forgiving because I'm like, well, they kept almost being canceled. And like, I think even getting a season 3 was a big deal. Like they thought they were done after 2. Uh, so like if I know the behind the scenes, I can be a little bit more forgiving about like maybe some disjointed storytelling.
yeah, because it does. I do think it helps a lot to know what the film, yeah, or showrunners, I guess.
Yeah.
You can tell I'm more um, I'm more used to talking about movies than I am about TV shows. Um, but yeah, it's a little bit more forgiving whenever you know at least a little bit of what the showrunners had to deal with
Yeah.
behind the scenes.
Yeah. Like, in Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, like, eh, Chadwick Boseman died. So, I mean, the movie's freaking fantastic, but like, the fact that like you don't see him at all, like maybe if someone who didn't know that actor had passed away, they might be like, why didn't they show him? But the actor passed away. So you're like, yes, that makes sense why he has to pass away off screen.
Hmm. And then going back to the episode, I do love how Illyria just pretty
Hmm.
casually dispatches this torture demon, and then after Gunn tells her that somebody has to wear the amulet, I love that Illyria comes up with this idea to put the amulet on the torture demon, and so it ends this first scene with the torture demon cutting his own heart out.
Yeah, yeah, I really like that.
And although I really wish that at some point they circled back, because I would have loved to see the torture demon in the family setting.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. I I really liked the idea of this like family, like and I mean it's not in this episode, but underneath when you see the like where Lindsay is and when they're like, oh, he's probably in some like torture hell dimension, and then we cut to like him waking up with his like wife and his like kid running in, and you think it's all like cookie cutter happy, but then she's like, oh, I need something from the basement, and then we see like the torture basement.
this is like that episode was like One Division before One Division.
Yes, yes, it really is. And the thing I like about Illyria, which like sometimes we get to see Buffy do this, but it feels very glory, where it's like she's not pressed about this torture dimension. She's not pressed about this like giant hulking demon. She's just like, this is annoying and I need to get rid of it. And I like when we can have like a superpowered character. I like watching a character like that with superpowers be in a superpowered setting where whatever supernatural thing is not affecting them at all. Like they don't care about it. So I do appreciate seeing Illyria just like annoyed at this monster and like very quickly saving Gunn.
Yeah, and then we cut to Angel and Wesley having this discussion about Illyria in general, and how and Angel is basically
Yeah, yeah,
saying he's basically anti Illyria, and Wesley is pro Illyria, even though he's very emotionless and practically catatonic at this point. He's just sitting in the couch, not talking very quietly and very matter of factly, and even when Illyria pops up with gun and is holding him by the neck, Wesley is the one that's just like,
yeah.
he's very important to us. You should let him go. You're being very, that's very bad manners.
Yeah, and the thing I like about that is, I just finished season 1. Like that feels like it would be very reversed if this were season 1. Like Wesley is very like silly in season 1 and Angel's way more stoic, and it feels like I like to seeing the characters grieve in different ways, right? Cuz clearly Wesley and Gunn, they both had a relationship with her, and like Angel loved her too, just not in a romantic way, but like arguably Wesley and Gunn would have the most reason to be the angriest. And yet like Wesley's, like you said, he's more just like taking care of Illyria, and it's like he's transferring taking care of Fred to taking care of Illyria, even though Illyria really doesn't need taken care of. Um, and I like seeing Angel be a little bit more like just like mad with his dad.
Yeah, and Illyria more or less reveals that she did this in order, like now, if she has basically one up on Wesley. Like Wesley owes her a debt of in order because she saved Gunn, who's important to them.
Yeah, yeah. And I can't not point out that it is wild that Amy Acker is such a good actor that she can pull off Fred and then a character that is nothing like Fred at all. And both, like you said, we think of Illyria a lot with this series, and she pulls off both, and like Illyria, she pulls off at the end. Like I do think that's pretty impressive, like acting wise.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of funny that part of the reason why this whole thing came about is because Joss Whedon had these like Shakespeare sessions at his house with some of the actors, and I think just seeing Amy Acker doing a different type of role in Shakespeare made him want to put something like that into Angel, and so that is at least in part with why he came up with Illyria for her to showcase her acting abilities.
Yeah, and that makes sense because we see that her abilities are good.
Then we get the opening titles, and afterwards, Gunn walks back into his office with two comically giant stacks of papers waiting for him.
And then is this when he goes to talk to Wesley?
Yeah, and then he goes into Wesley's office shortly afterwards, and this is where we see the manic half of Wesley's manic depressive state, with all the books lying all over the floor, and he has this extremely nervous energy as he's just kind of going from place to place, and the desk to the floor and everywhere.
And I do like that because, like you mentioned, we had seen him be so calm. So to see like, oh, like on the inside he is like freaking out. That's why there's like all this like mess in his office. So I kind of liked that, like transposed with how calm he's been about it, like with Illyria.
Yeah, and they have this nice moment where it feels like a very Whedon-esque apology, where Wesley says that he feels like he should apologize without actually apologizing, and Gunn says that's probably for the best because he isn't sure that he would accept his apology because he's been having his heart ripped out every day for the past 2 weeks.
Right. Yeah.
And then I also noticed I haven't talked about what Gunn is wearing because this is a departure because I think for most of the rest of the season after he got his lawyer implant he was always wearing sharp suits, and now he's wearing this gray hoodie, and it says Wyoming expert climbers only Devil's Tower.
I
And
definitely did not
so
read what it said on his shirt.
yeah, it was hard to make out. I had to like pause at different points in the episode in order to get a good look at it. Like I could see the Wyoming pretty easily, and I think I saw the Devil's Tower, but it was very hard to make out the expert climbers only. But I do think that that is a commentary on where they are this season in more ways than one, because it kind of shows how where Gunn is, because he's cast off, like this is the part where he's cast off that lawyer instinct because the price that he paid for it he realized was a lot higher than he ever expected.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also I do think that like Devil's Tower is kind of like a a metaphor for Wolfram and Hart itself. That's they're kind of in that Wolfram and Hart is their Devil's Tower, and it requires an expert climber in order to get out of it there alive.
I like that. I'm gonna go with that too. I'm gonna agree with that.
And I also like in throughout this conversation at one point Gunn says this place just went Poseidon on my ass, and I kind of I love those bits of like pop culture reference without really any explanation, because if I mean Poseidon is the god of the sea, but the way he's talking about how everything's so messed up with Fred being Illyria now, and everything with Wolfram and Hart, that he's referencing the movie The Poseidon Adventure, where it's a disaster movie with a sinking ship, and at one point during the climax, I believe that this ship is upside down, and so they're in the characters are trying to escape the sinking ship while it's upside down underwater.
Yeah, yeah. I remember when that remake came out. I saw it in theaters, I think.
That I haven't seen either, but I know enough that like that is the beginning and ending of my knowledge about the Poseidon Adventure.
Fair. Isn't it funny that we can know about movies like that just from like being online?
Yeah, that learn about movies through osmosis.
Yeah.
I like to call it. And I also like it's the near the end of their conversation at one point, Wesley like looks at his watch and he taps it as if it might be broken, which I feel like that kind of foreshadows how time is broken within this episode.
Yeah, yeah.
And then we move on to Spike and Illyria's sparring match, and I think this is a fun interaction between these two characters because, I love Spike. He is such a great character, and he behaves so much differently than everybody else with how he acts with Illyria, because everybody else looks at her and sees Fred, but he's the one character that he looks at Illyria and he only sees Illyria.
Yeah. Yeah. And I kind of like, I mean, again, it's like Spike didn't know Fred as long, so of course he is able to be like, okay, I can separate the two more than, maybe the rest of the gang would be able to. And I don't know, I like, he had a good relationship with Fred, but he also has a good relationship with Illyria. And I've said this a bunch of times on the podcast. I think of the Buffyverse actors, I feel like Charisma Carpenter and James Marsters kind of have chemistry with anyone they share a scene with. Like they're both so charming.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that, and I like how in in a little way I kind of feel like they're two sides of a similar coin, because Spike is a few hundred years old himself, at least a couple hundred years old, and Illyria is like ancient beyond ancient,
Yeah.
but Spike has lived in the world and he's changed and adapted to the world around him, where Illyria is still stuck in her ancient ways mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. And the the funny thing is when I had James Marsters on Slayerfest 98, he actually said that he was brought in season 4 to try to replace Cordelia because and it is true. Spike is like you said, not Illyria, Cordelia. um he's like he was like supposed to be the Cordelia character to like call the gang out in Buffy, and he kind of was, but like then they realized Anya worked better as the new Cordelia, and Spike was like his own thing. But so I do think like I don't know, it like makes sense that the two of them would be the most charming if they're like, oh yeah, let's that actor can kind of do that job. But and I think that's why he's able to still have chemistry with both Fred and Illyria. I mean, I know they're the same actor. Like realistically, it's like, yes, that is the same person. But on the
Mhm.
show, they are, two different characters.
Yeah,
And I do think it's a little bit of what you said that he can like relate a little bit to, being very, this like ancient person in a new world.
I think it's like he just goes along with whatever is like, he rolls with the punches
Yeah. Yeah.
more than any other character in either series, I think.
Yeah.
And I think within this conversation, there's two quotes that I think really it really encapsulates their two different viewpoints, where Illyria is talking about how she views the world, and Spike says, the one who dies with the most toys wins. And Illyria replies, to never die and to conquer all, that is winning.
Mm.
And those are just two like almost completely opposite viewpoints right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we get a nice little reminder of Illyria's time powers as she slows Spike down mid jump, even though he calls it cheating. Which, if I don't think this effect holds up very well, but
Yeah.
it does what it needs to do, I guess.
Yeah, I will say when I was rewatching it today, I had to remind myself that was her like her power, not just them doing a Matrix type slow motion jump.
Yeah. And then afterwards, we have this conversation between Spike and Angel, and Angel is still fixed on, Illyria is the enemy, and she's the one that's like, Spike thinks that he's testing her and her abilities, and Angel feels like Illyria is the one that's basically, testing them and seeing where their weaknesses are.
Yeah, yeah.
And then we have this little whooshing sound effect, and Illyria pops up in the room behind them, and she appears winded. And I do like that this is because we do see her pop up in this moment a little bit later in the episode.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like at this point, I think especially with the sound effect, you know that something weird is going on, but you can, like, first time watching it, you can kind of just explain it away as, oh, she just came through the door.
Yeah.
I mean, and Spike even, thinks that she's just winded from the fight, even though she's winded from jumping through time.
Yes.
And he calls her Little Shiva, and it's I think that's kind of funny because I'm pretty sure that he's basically referencing one of the main deities of Hinduism, and he's probably calling her that just because he's typically depicted with blue skin. So, and he later calls her Babe the Blue Ox, but he's also known as the Destroyer, which I think fits Illyria very well as a character too.
Yeah, it does. It does.
And then, we get Gunn back in his office, and then we have the appearance of Incognito Lorne, which is basically just Lorne wearing a hat and sunglasses.
I kind of love like that. It reminds me of like in the Ninja Turtles when they would wear the like trench coat and hat, and it's like, well, clearly that's still a Ninja Turtle.
Yeah. And I'm glad that they've figured out a way to put Lorne in this episode, because he's a great character, but season 5 just didn't really know what to do with him.
Yeah.
And I feel like this was like Lorne Incognito is kind of a weak running joke through this episode.
Yeah, I mean it's like a silly fun gag, but yeah.
And also this scene between the two of them almost feels like a bit of narrative catch up, as Lorne kind of explains what's going on with Wesley and what's going on with Illyria, because Gunn's been gone for 2 episodes, or I guess an episode which is like 2 weeks in Angel time, and I'm pretty sure that this is like the only time that Angel actually actively uses the walkie-talkie, and it's just to call Lorne and them in for a meeting, even though it's the whole point of this is that it Lorne makes it seem like it was Angel's idea for him to be incognito and follow Illyria.
Yeah.
And then we get this table meeting, and this is Angel is still kind of one track mind, trying to get Wesley to find a weakness for Illyria and the way to kill her. And it's the thing that I do like about this is I think Wesley's performance in this, and you get to see another look into his mind and how he views Illyria at this point in time. Because Angel says that Illyria killed Fred, but Wesley corrects him, saying that she infected her with no more malice than a viral phage.
Yeah. Which,
And
like,
so
it sounds harsh, but it's true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it really shows Wesley's stage of grief at this point, where he is really blaming Illyria less and less for Fred's death. Like he doesn't view Illyria as having actively killed Fred. It's just that Illyria's appearance caused Fred's death. It's almost like they're two separate events in his mind at this point, in order for him to work out his grieving process.
Yeah, and I mean, I know I already said this, but again, I do like watching grief on these. I do like, not that I like, but I appreciate that we get like different ways of grieving, and we get to watch these characters actually grieve, because often in genre, it's like, well, that character died. We'll have them be sad for one episode, then we're moving on. And I appreciate that it wasn't. I mean, I guess it would have been harder for them to do that since the body of that character is still around. But I just appreciate seeing the different ways these characters grieve. Like, I think that's good writing.
Yeah, like a lot of times you have one episode of repercussion, and then the next episode you're at the new status quo.
Yeah. And I mean, Angel even kind of did that with Doyle. Like, they were sad for one episode, and then they kind of moved on, and then they like mention him sometimes, but yeah, it was kind of like he died. They had one sad episode, and then Wesley came in, and they kind of was like, "Man, we'll mention Doyle sometimes."
Yeah, and then Cordelia got the vision, so
Right.
she was basically Doyle's replacement.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, and then at this table we get a brief update of the forthcoming apocalypse, which is basically the reminder of where this season is heading towards its finale, and we get Adam Baldwin coming in as their new liaison to the senior partners, and I really love how smug Adam Baldwin plays this character.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we find out that that wasn't actually the first torture dimension that Illyria went to. She destroyed 11 other torture dimensions before she found Gunn, and that's caused them to go from the Wolverman Heart's #1 earner down to near the bottom of the barrel, and they have a lot of catching up to do. And he also sets up the what we'll eventually find out to be the Fell Brethren, and he basically just refers to them as very important players, which is, I think, truer than most people would realize on a first watch.
Yeah. Yeah. Because especially in a genre shows like this, it's like every other monster or demon is very important and could end the world.
Yeah, um, and then after this, we get this conversation between Wesley and Illyria, and I think that this conversation is interesting for very many reasons, and I think the way it's shot too is very interesting because Wesley is like sitting on the floor against his desk, and Illyria starts out by kneeling down next to him so that they're face to face, and then she stands up as like kind of a power move as the conversation turns, because she initially talks about how they're having a conversation about, she's saying that this is not the first time this moment in time has happened, but she's saying it because she's bouncing around through time. But for Wesley, he's just like, yes, we've talked about the days of the week, and he's thinks that it's just her struggling with the modern time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she also says that he's more to her than just her guide, and you get this implication that she's going to go on with some nicety, but then she turns and says, "You're my betrayer."
Yeah.
And they discuss this event that happens off screen where he had tried to erase her from history in order to potentially bring back Fred. And this moment goes by really quickly. It's just like 30 seconds of dialogue, give or take. But I feel like this is a really important moment in explaining what's going on with Illyria, because they mentioned that in him doing that, he basically, instead of erasing that moment of time, what he did instead was he brought back more of Fred's memories into Illyria's body.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why I do think in Angel and Faith they bring Fred back where it's like Hulk situation where Fred's the Bruce Banner and Illyria is the Hulk. And I do think they would have been able to do that if the show hadn't gotten canceled.
Yeah, I think that line, like this scene really sets that up, that they could have
Yeah.
that they could expand on that. Like if they did get a season 6 on the TV version, they could have had like a flashback to that moment
Yeah.
and explaining what happened at that point in time. But within these episodes, I think it's just a good explanation of why Illyria is acting more human at this point, and why she's growing more humanity, because she has more of Fred's memories, which I think really gives her this extra dose of humanity.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then after this, we get Gunn with the file and the appearance of David Boreanaz's real life wife at the time, Julie Bergman, playing Amanda, who has sold her baby to the Fell Brethren, and um, again, I think that this is and a, almost a weird little bit of a mistake by Gunn. I know he's only been back for a little while, but um, earlier in this season, he's always been like extremely on top of things, and yet he makes this mistake by thinking that Amanda is their client, but it turns out that the Fell Brethren are the actual clients.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually do like that moment when like one of them is like, "Whose lawyer are you?" and like freaks out.
Yeah, that's a fun moment, but this is just the well, I think I skipped over it in my notes, but right before Amanda comes in, Angel and Gunn are having this discussion about how Hamilton had that meeting with Gunn in the torture dimension, and that's another setup kind of for the finale for the next couple episodes, where it's setting up this growing tension because Angel, like Gunn mentions that Hamilton offered him a deal to get out of the torture dimension, and Angel asks if he took him up on it, and Gunn is like,
Yeah.
"Do you even have to ask?" And Angel's like, "Yeah, I kind of do." And I think that is just really great writing, especially in terms of like setup and foreshadowing, because at this point in the season, it really fits. It feels like there has been this growing tension, and then just a couple episodes later, you realize that this was part of Angel's plan.
Yeah, yeah. I do. While I fully don't think that was always the like what they were going towards, I do appreciate that they do that. They like tie it like, oh, that's why, 'cause it was part of his plan.
Mm-hmm. And then this last scene, we get another bit of Wesley and Illyria, and it's I I love Illyria's dialogue so much. Like it's written in it's very unusual language, but it's beautiful in a way,
Mm-hmm.
and just like the oddness of it. And it starts out with her saying, it doesn't exist until it cracks apart, and then she pauses for a moment and then says time, and like Wesley is like doesn't know what she's talking about, but I love that that's another line that's talking about the format of this entire episode. And then after that, she says, your opinion of me weighs less than sunlight."
Yeah,
Like,
which is very good.
what other character can pull off a quote like that?
And not many actors could pull it off either.
Yeah, but she just makes it seem just so effortless.
Yeah, yeah.
But and then she knocks the water off the table, and then that is where this loop ends. So,
Yup.
did you have anything else that you wanted to talk about for this episode?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, I think we covered it a bit. I do think, technical difficulties aside, I think we ended up going longer than we did the first time around.
I think so, yeah.
But yeah, thanks for rescheduling and talking with me about this first loop again. It was a fun conversation. I think we covered some new ground, and unfortunately, that anything that we didn't cover this time that we did last time is lost to the sands of time. But for anybody else that is listening to you for the first time, why don't you go ahead and let them know where else you can be found online.
Cool. Yeah. You could find me at Ian X Carlos on all social media platforms. You can find my Buffy and Angel podcast at Slayerfest X98 on all social media platforms, and on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. And same thing with my horror podcast, My Bloody Judy, which is at My Bloody Judy on all socials. And you can find us on YouTube and Spotify and Apple Podcasts and everywhere else as well.
And as always, you can find me. I am Bubbawheat, and I'm on Twitter where I'm at Bubbawheat. You can find this show, It's Time to Rewind, on Anchor.fm as well as anywhere else that you listen to podcasts. We also have a Facebook group, It's Time to Rewind, a time loop group. You can join that and discuss episodes as they come out, as well as have discussions about time loops in general. And until next time, grrr.
Arg.
Time doesn't exist until it cracks apart. Time doesn't exist until it cracks apart. Time doesn't exist until you were pretty at night. Time doesn't exist until it cracks apart. You were pretty at night. Slew the white-haired one first. You were pretty at night. Slew the white-haired one first.